welcome back to Block TV. It's time now for Blockchain on Booze, where we round up a panel of blockchain and crypto pros, serve them some liquor, and talk about the major developments of this week. I'm Asher Westrop Evans, this is my host Oran Spitzer, and here are our panelists.
Absolutely, so thank you guys for joining us, first of all, and then from left to right, I'm going to introduce you all here. Kicking it off with Roy Katsiri, markets editor and reporter at Globes, Leon Markovitz, business development manager at Celsius, and Gil Solomon, venture capital, blockchain, and corporate attorney. How are you guys?
Happy to be here.
Cheers. Pleasure, guys. Raise a drink to you all, and as well, raise a drink to some interesting developments around the sphere. So I'm just going to start this week talking about Jack Dorsey, the CEO of Twitter, and his desire to decentralize social media as a whole. Now, Dorsey came out in an extensive thread talking about his goals here. I'll read just one of his tweets, as we don't have time to go through the whole thing, where he states, Twitter is funding a small independent team of up to 5 open source architects, engineers, and designers to develop an open and decentralized standard for social media. The goal is for Twitter to ultimately be a client of this standard. Now, Jack obviously has been known for his support of blockchain, cryptocurrency technology around the world. Now he wants to decentralize social media. What do you guys think? Roy, I'm going to start with you. Take it away.
Sure. So I think it's an exciting announcement. I mean, for blockchain community, maybe for the Twitter community in general. I'm a Jack Dorsey fan myself. I think he has very interesting ideas regarding blockchain ecosystem and regarding the social media, and I think it's a promising announcement. We still have to wait and see how it develops in the next few weeks and months, but for sure this is something we should follow and could have really a significant impact on the ecosystem.
I mean, it certainly could have a significant impact, but I want to turn to you, Gil, and ask, what does decentralized social media mean to you, to anyone? Do we know? I mean, he sort of laid it out in his thread, but I read through it a couple of times. It's more a vision than it is a clear set of goals, as far as I understand.
So basically, when it comes to people like Dorsey, essentially social media giants, I'm full of doubts, because, for these guys, they're so immensely rich that they can have a setup of 6, 7, up to 7 architects, engineers, whatever, just for the purpose of this tweet, right? But in his case, I'm less doubtful. Although I think he's being too optimistic, since social media in general is the central part of today's data trade. Like today, they're trading on data. This is the best currency there is to trade in today. So decentralizing it, meaning taking the monetary effect out of it. And I don't think it's possible.
What about cutting out? I'm sorry, I'm cutting you off there. Keep going, and then I'll make my point.
Go ahead. No, I think, well, first we should give credit to projects that are already trying to do this, like Mastodon and Pipet.
Thank you, Leon. You can keep going. That is what I was going to say.
And then we should also look at the broader picture. So Jack has always been just very much of a maximalist. So you have the Square crypto side project with Twitter's Square, even though they claim to be, an open source project. It will be mostly focused on Bitcoin. And Jack Dorsey also announced recently that he will be going to spend some time living in Nigeria, 3 months to 6 months a year. So I think, taking on the progress that these other projects have been doing, and then attempting to do it with the captive market that they have on Twitter, but with Bitcoin, then we could see something amazing where, Twitter already validates in some way influence. And if we do it with Bitcoin, that would be awesome, plus Square.
I mean, I got to wonder as well. I mean, Twitter has come out already. Recently, we had Jack Dorsey tweeting that they're not going to allow political advertising on the platform. They've tried to, Dorsey particularly, but Twitter as a platform has tried to present itself as the progressive social media platform. And I don't mean that in terms of political ideals necessarily, but in terms of moving forward beyond political agendas and dealing with a lot of the social media issues that sort of face our times. Do you think this is a step in that direction? And I'll leave this open to whoever wants to answer. Or is this just, perhaps as Gil suggested, a bit of fluff coming out of a billionaire?
I don't think it's fluff. I mean, my opinion is that Jack is being Jack, meaning way optimistic than most people in social media. I mean, you wouldn't see Zuckerberg doing something like that, right? You'll see his project by creating a centralized token or currency or whatever, to use and to capitalize on the power of their social media outlets. But, I think that if anyone has the power to do it, it's like people, it's like Jack Dorsey. But I can't see it like going and spreading towards the entire social media concept.
Unless he's able to take a user, right,
but
a user
no one-
experience and shift it. Because let's say Steam It, for example, really popular within the cryptocurrency and blockchain community as the thing to go to. I think the block is now trying to create the voice, or it's in beta, if I'm not mistaken, at testnet. There are a bunch of other platforms doing the same thing. So you're saying he's very optimistic and he's somebody who's trying to do the right thing. But people are already trying to do the right thing. What is his added value?
His power.
Well, if I can interject here, I think I'm going to say something that I think Sonic Wombat here from the BLOCKTV would agree with, and I think that politics belongs to the meme lords.
Okay.
Now, Facebook went and they said, we will continue allowing anybody and we will not, monitor and judge what's politically correct or fake news. And then Twitter said, we will just ban political people to advertise.
Right.
But then you have all of these, fake accounts and people that are experts with memes doing their own memes, and they can go around that sort of loophole that Twitter has. I think that this is a way towards improving the political discourse in which it would increase the stakes that people need to spread fake news and fake memes.
Right, but I mean, I guess as well, in a world so driven by sort of algorithmic decision making, and in which a lot of, Facebook, for example, Zuckerberg has come out saying we don't want to be the arbiters of what's right and what's wrong. Right. Is Dorsey's decision to say let's decentralize the whole situation and just move away from the question of who decides, make it decentralized? Is that real? Is that feasible? Is that something?
The question is, how will it be implemented? Will it be truly decentralized? I mean, Twitter, and if it will be truly decentralized, it should have a very significant effect. I mean, on the whole ecosystem, on the media, on the social media ecosystem, on the tech industry at all. And I think this is a significant move if you compare it to Facebook. Because, I mean, in this move, Dorsey says, look, we are not Facebook. We are doing things differently. And this is a challenge for Twitter, because if he succeeds in this move, I think he can put Twitter in a very interesting spot, facing other social media giants as Facebook, and becoming something which is very different, and maybe it will attract many new users and attract the industry at all.
Twitter with skin in the game.
Right. So then last question before we move on, is this the blockchain use case that we've all been waiting for? That deafening silence.
Yes.
I mean, there are so many use cases to blockchain that I don't think that's the one. I think that payments would be the one, or data validation would be the one, but this is essentially a very good use case.
Okay. Well,
so they are doing a good job.
Yeah.
At least we all agree with that. The idea is good. Is it the use case? Perhaps not.
Is it plausible? Is it doable?
Right.
Regardless. All right, but we'll move on now.
Right.
So the next story comes to us actually, interestingly enough, via Reuters. The mainstream media put it out there, but a report coming out from CoinShares suggesting that mining pool hash rate collectivity has grown in China, that we've gone up from the sort of 60% that we were seeing back in June. They now claim by CoinShares' own data that we're getting closer to 66%, and that's part of a trend that's growing. Now, this is an interesting question because Reuters presents this as a sort of part of the trade war, clash of civilizations argument that's sort of playing out in the wider political ecosystem at the moment. China, having all this hash rate being developed inside their country, can potentially take control of the Bitcoin network, is sort of an implicit narrative coming out of Reuters. Two questions I want to ask in relation to this. One, do these numbers surprise us at all? I mean, the sort of 70% hash rate or thereabouts speculated to be coming out of China has been discussed for a long time. And two, is this a problem for Bitcoin and for cryptocurrencies as a whole?
So I think from day one, crypto mining was majorly centralized. And of course, there was a debate surrounding it, but I remember even 3 years ago, when I started exploring this industry and checking out where is the crypto mining centralized and where is it centered exactly in the world globally. So even then, China was a major player. I mean, from day one. And we see Bitmain and we see other mining giants, who come from China. But it's not just the companies. We see that the government, even when it has like rules against crypto mining or Bitcoin mining, it doesn't eliminate it. I mean, if China really wanted to eliminate it, it could do it easily. There's no question about it. But we see they don't, and eventually we see this industry growing, and we get signs from the Chinese government and from officials that China is looking at the blockchain industry as a promising industry, and they want to lead it. So I think through Bitcoin mining and cryptocurrency mining, there's a very good chance that China is going to continue to lead this industry. And so I'm not surprised at all by these numbers. I wouldn't be surprised even if they were bigger than that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that could worry places like the US, Canada, and maybe even in Europe that are behind in these terms.
But I mean, there are other initiatives that exist out there, whether we talk about new developments that are coming in Canada has seen significant uptick. Iran, interestingly enough, is another country that saw, for various purposes, a lot of crypto mining in the past. I mean, do you think China is going to maintain the monopoly for the foreseeable future?
It's a country full of resources, so basically, yeah, they can, master the computer power to do it. So I see it as Roy said, and I'm fully agreeing with this. We talked about like 2 weeks ago in our Blockchain Boost panel that China is actually, we saw it in the state media, in one of their state newspapers, having an article about Bitcoin, and we're seeing that there is a certain development towards cryptocurrency and Bitcoin essentially. So as I see it, they are going to develop this let's say, ability, and will continue to lead.
Yeah, I'm not surprised either. I mean, we see that a lot of mining also happens in Venezuela by mining equipment that was confiscated or nationalized. That it doesn't even appear on the data that probably this report took it from. It's interesting, you don't see nodes coming out of Venezuela. But yeah, we also see, Russia, or former Soviet Union, countries like Transnistria, they also do a lot of mining over there. But I think that they're benefiting from Bitcoin's price continuing to increase, and I think that the cost of, doing a 51% attack would be very expensive, and then all of the Bitcoin that they've been mining, and probably, I don't think they're getting rid of it anytime soon. I don't think there's any, from a game theory point of view, I don't think that they have an incentive to.
So you don't see a concern about China potentially seizing the means of production when it comes to cryptocurrency mining? I mean, you said yourself, it's been done in Venezuela in the past, even in Iran, we saw it to a smaller degree. If China turns around with the percentage of the hash rate that it has under its theoretical control and says, we're taking this either for the purposes of just earning Bitcoin for themselves or for performing a 51% attack, that's not a scenario you see as potentially likely?
I think that the costs are too high, and then, I don't know if there would be a fork or if they could reverse whatever 51% attack would do in the chain, and then it would be good for Bitcoin. I think that the whole meme of honey badger don't care that people apply to Bitcoin remains any way you look at it. There's just the security budget is such that the costs are too high for an attacker that would invest so much and has been earning so much Bitcoin with so much power to be interested in dropping the price of Bitcoin, because such an attack, that's what it would do. So,
what about, does the Chinese CBDC factor into it? Their own desires for a digital renminbi,
Yeah.
does that factor in at all?
Well, that's a different issue. I mean, in terms of Bitcoin, I think, to answer the last question, China doesn't have any incentive to destroy Bitcoin or to devaluate it. So I don't think they will allow, as long as it's in their hands, I don't think they will allow any kind of attack like that, a 51% attack for sure. But concerning the central bank decentralized cryptocurrency, well, China for sure is leading in this area, and I'm not sure they'll be the first country to issue this coin, but they'll probably be the biggest one issuing this coin in the future, in the next future. This is one of the main issues last year, for this year that we're ending now, and also for next year. So it will have an effect, but it's a different effect. It's not immediately on Bitcoin, but generally on cryptocurrencies and digital coins, because once people can use a central bank issued cryptocurrency, it's a new main to come into this market, which will allow many more people than we see today to have access to this market, and that could be a huge game changer for Bitcoin and any other cryptocurrency.
Right, absolutely. And in that conversation, perhaps some people don't see this as maybe a great move because China won't have a blockchain as we are discussing it naturally, right? This is a very specific country with very specific set of circumstances that we're all kind of aware of. But in this race that you're speaking of, I believe you mentioned it earlier, right? What country is gonna win? Some people are already thinking China's crossed the finish line. There's no catching up at this point. But let's talk about that U.S. lagging behind very specifically. There are other countries as well. Anti-crypto Congressman Brad Sherman, I love when he speaks just because it's always, entertaining in some way, shape, or form, just his wording and his verbalization of things in general. He was elected to be chair of the subcommittee on investor protection. This means a lot, particularly to folks in the crypto space, just because that subcommittee kind of oversees the SEC in some way, shape, or form anyway. Now, at the same time, we have Treasury Secretary Mnuchin, who said that the U.S. has no plans to create this, a digital currency, which again, some would say keeps us lag behind. But let's take a look at Mnuchin's statement before we keep talking.
I would differentiate what China is doing from what a Bitcoin or a Facebook would do. What China is doing is really issuing digital currency in lieu of physical cash, and they can track all that. So they will be able to track where that goes. That's different than a Bitcoin. It's no different than in the U.S. If money is sent on the Fed wire system, it can be tracked, and money through SWIFT has identifiers. So again, I would differentiate kind of what central banks are doing from what a Libra or a Bitcoin is doing. As it relates to the Fed, and Chair Powell and I have discussed this at length, I think we both agree for the near future, in the next 5 years, we see no need for the Fed to issue digital currency. And that's because, again, we have a very sophisticated system. The Fed is working on electronic payment system. We need to make sure they're real-time electronic payment system in the U.S. But thank you for your concerns.
We're not talking about a little lag. We're talking about a 5-year lag,
but
which
didn't you hear they've got the Fed Reserve, the Fed wire system? It's practically a blockchain,
right.
I mean, if you ask Mnuchin.
Pretty much.
Right.
They're working on it. They have it covered. It's not necessary we'll wait 5 years. Now, this is kind of, a silly question here, but is the U.S. working backwards? Is the U.S. going backwards? What's going on with the U.S.?
Well, I think in terms of economy, 5 years is not too far, and if it will eventually happen in 5 years, that's good news for the ecosystem, for the blockchain ecosystem. But I think Mnuchin has a good point saying that this is a separate issue. He separates the issue of central banks' cryptocurrency and what we know as cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. Right. And he knows what he's talking about. But I think an interesting thing to look at is what Mnuchin and Donald Trump, his president, said about half a year ago when Libra was launched. I mean, they were attacking Bitcoin and any other cryptocurrency and even the idea of the Libra project right on. And they were immediately against it. And hearing from him that maybe it's not a bad idea for his country, for the biggest economy in the world, for the U.S., to issue a central bank cryptocurrency, even if it's in 5 years, is still
right. But we're speaking about. There was nowhere in there where he said 5 years and then we'll have a developed thing that we can. That's even taking it a step further. It's in 5 years we'll think about potentially creating a committee that will then work on this thing that will eventually be a national currency. There's a lot to that. So, them moving backwards and the U.S. being behind, I feel like it's a bit more. Leon, you look like you really want to speak.
Yes, thank you. I don't think that the U.S. is moving backwards First, the senator that you mentioned at the beginning, I think it's a confused old white male, but he's dangerous. But focusing on what Mnuchin said, first I agree with your statements. Their stance has changed towards Facebook, and I think it's been discussed in previous BLOCKTV broadcasts, which is basically it's very possible that Facebook's Libra project will end up just having the dollar. And so Libra will be just like USDC from Center or Circle. They will let the private sector, lead the way, just as America is known for letting the private sector, take us to the moon. And then they will launch Fed now once they really have an understanding of how this works. So I don't think it's moving backwards. And then also we need to remember that Steve Mnuchin, has been with Trump since the days of the campaign, and that they used Bitcoin in the campaign. So Mnuchin really understands Bitcoin. I don't think he's against Bitcoin.
Well, perhaps he's for accepting money. You know what I
Correct.
mean? I think there's nobody out there who would say, no, do not give me that Bitcoin. I will not take your
Absolutely.
money at all. But before
There's someone that loves money is Mnuchin.
That's what I'm
Money's
saying.
green, yellow, blue, gold,
right.
we'll take it.
We'll accept it. Now, before
But
we
it's
move on
moving
to Gil,
forward.
I feel like you'll have a lot more to say
Yeah.
after we watch. So, Brad Sherman, we spoke about him a lot, but for those who just hadn't had the pleasure of hearing him speak, here's one of those times. Let's take a look.
Now, we're told by some that innovation is always good. The most innovative thing that happened this century is when Osama bin Laden came up with the innovative idea of flying 2 airplanes into towers. That's the most consequential innovation, although this may do more to endanger America than even that. People call this the Libra. It's not the Libra. If it finally happens, nobody's going to call it Libra. They're going to call it a Zuckbuck. This is Zuckerberg's baby.
So, Zuckbuck didn't happen, so that was a wrong thing there. But he did make a really lovely comparison. I'm saying this sarcastically, yes, a lovely comparison to Libra and the terrorist attack, a very terrible, terrible terrorist attack. Is this the correct person to be leading this subcommittee? Why or why not, folks? Gil?
Okay, so first of all, as an attorney who represented issuers of cryptocurrency, I can say that it's not a progress or a way back. I think they're still remaining in the same place they were like 3 years ago. No change whatsoever. Appointing this guy as the head of the committee will leave them in the same place. They have been always fighting against cryptocurrency and blockchain. There's no change to that. They've been aggressively investigating cryptocurrency issuers, for example, Kick Software, who had their ICO, and from looking at their ICO, participating in their ICO, I can say they were very meticulous in their KYC and AML process. And the US, essentially the SEC, still killed this company or killed their product by investigating. So the US is not progressing, it's not going backwards, it's still in the same place, and it will go nowhere as I see it, at least for 5 to 7 years.
It'll go nowhere. So for 5 to 7 years, you think just development will start? That's a question to everybody.
I don't think there's going to be any change whatsoever. I mean, there's going to be talking about it, but as long as these guys are still appointing at the head of the committee or the Fed or whatever, I mean, it's still the same Secretary Treasury. There's not going to be any
right,
change.
That same anti-stance.
I think there is progress. Fed now, as Asher mentioned, like it doesn't work. Like it won't work because if I have, gold in World of Warcraft, and I cannot transfer that value to someone instantly to their Venmo, and that's what blockchain will allow, and Fed now will not work. So I think they see China moving really fast, and perhaps this could be a game of chicken, where it's China, I have my conspiracy theories. Mark is also married to a Chinese woman, but let's not get into that. But maybe it's a chicken game to see who moves faster into this. And I think, they're making the right decision in letting the private sector experiment first. Don't kill Bitcoin, which is the gold, and that is powering all of this innovation around cryptocurrency. And then after 5 years, they will have a better understanding and probably launch a product that will be similar to China's. But I think they will just wait for the private sector to lead the initiative, which China doesn't have.
But that raises an interesting point about the US traditionally a leader in innovation, now potentially becoming a follower in this innovation.
Right.
But as well, we've reframed this. We framed this as there are no friends of crypto or sort of blockchain technologies in the Capitol building, but there are some. Recently, we saw Kelly Loeffler, the former CEO of Bakkt, enter as a senator for the state of Georgia. Now, there are some friends of cryptocurrency in there. There are blockchain advocacy groups, Bitcoin advocacy groups working in the Capitol, trying to change attitudes, and maybe the current Congress doesn't have a mindset to it, but who knows what the future can bring. Is this a definite narrative? Can these stories all change on a dime, as we've seen with so many other elements of legislation?
First of all, we're in an election year in the US. So who knows? With the next president, and I'm not sure it will be Donald Trump.
Yangan.
So who knows? What will be the next policy, the next government policy in the US concerning cryptocurrencies? But still, even if it's Donald Trump, even if it's a government which is against cryptocurrencies, we still have to separate two things. I mean, the use cases of blockchain, I think the Federal Reserve announced they are testing these use cases, and the European Central Bank said the same thing. So that's a good point here. I mean, that's a very significant thing for the ecosystem, for the blockchain industry, because if these central banks will eventually use these technologies, that's a game changer for the whole world.
I see the bank, there's on YouTube, every week I see the Bank of International Settlements or the IMF, and they're changing their narrative, and every time they're becoming more accommodating.
Right.
Just 6 months ago, they were very dismissive of the whole stablecoin movement, and now they are open about it and saying that they've been talking about stablecoins since before Satoshi.
Guys, yeah.
Right.
So yes, let's see. I
they
think
are
they're
always
moving
changing
forward.
their narrative. They also have to, especially when big tech, right? We had Facebook in there. That's the only shift that occurred over the last few months, to have them be like, oh, so it's either we do it or they do it. It's an ultimatum at this point. They really have no choice. Another such company doing that is Microsoft, of course, with the Azure blockchain tools for enterprise use developers. That seems to be what they're targeting here. And they've been rolling out, their most recent is Azure Heroes, which they now have this reward system for. But that's not the only thing. They really have been rolling a lot out over the past couple of months. And take a look at this breakdown of kind of what that has been. Tech giant Microsoft is going all in on blockchain with several new features. Having utilized Engine's technology to create a system called Azure Heroes, which rewards its participants with unique non-fungible tokens, the tech giant expanded into the block with other features. One such product, Azure Blockchain Tokens, a preview tool to simplify the ability to define, create, and manage compliant tokens that are built to industry standards. In addition, a new feature of Azure Blockchain Service, currently in beta phase, captures blockchain ledger, transforms it, and then delivers that data to multiple sources via off-chain databases. Furthermore, the behemoth is continuing to build its investments for blockchain developers with updates to the Azure Blockchain Development Kit for Ethereum extensions meant to improve developers' productivity. The company is working with the goal of democratizing complex technologies and to simplify bureaucratic processes to solve shared problems in a trusted manner. That's just the tip of the iceberg, right? There have been the tools that have come out thus far from this blockchain as a service that they're kind of trying to be the leader in, it feels like. But IBM is sort of doing the same thing, right? They have the IBM Food Trust, trust your supplier. They're on par, I would say. A bit differently. Maybe they're working towards suppliers or supply chain solutions, but it seems to be more or less the same thing. Is this good for the space?
I think it's definitely good for the space. I mean, the more people experiment blockchain technology, no matter if it's a huge company like Microsoft or IBM or a small company like any startup we know, it's good news. I mean, in terms of more people learning about this technology, using this technology, talking about this technology, it's good news. I mean, there might be failures on the way. There might be mistakes, like everyone does mistakes. And I'm not sure Microsoft is going on the right way or IBM is going on the right way in this area. But for sure, I think it's good news for the ecosystem.
So I'd like to rephrase a bit, just because, yes, okay, potentially for the world and adoption. What about the actual ideology that blockchain and Bitcoin was then birthed with, right? You have these big...
What about the libertarians?
Yeah.
What about the cypherpunks?
Where are
You know,
the
where are they in all
anarchists?
this?
Where do they
Yeah.
fit in? So, you know, taking that into consideration.
Of course, for anyone who is like a crypto fan, you know, and a Bitcoin maximalist, so Microsoft is not, you know, is not an example for him for how this ecosystem should look like. I mean, coming from a centralized company, of course, with centralized products, I wouldn't expect them to offer, you know, like an alternative for Bitcoin, for example. But putting Bitcoin aside, I mean, we have to see that this ecosystem can develop in many other ways that maybe we can't imagine, we can't imagine yet. And Microsoft and IBM and other big companies are offering, you know, interesting solutions regarding this technology. Of course, Bitcoin will remain, you know, decentralized, will remain something that we don't want to see in the hands of any tech giant like Microsoft. And in that terms, it will be, of course, you know, it will work in separate ways, as I see it.
I mean, seeing all these corporate giants getting into blockchain, it's, I'm an optimist usually. This time I'm kind of not, but usually I'm an optimist. So I'm seeing all these guys, all these giants get into the space and operate in all sorts of use cases. We have IBM, we have JP Morgan, for example, and we have all sorts of use cases, and each one takes it to another direction. And I find it amazing because this essentially promises that blockchain in 10 years from now will not be a lost buzzword. Right. I mean, it's going to be strong and stronger as time progresses. And as I see it, maybe we won't have the decentralized effect, which the idealists wanted in the first place. We'll have Bitcoin for that, I believe. But as I see it, we'll have blockchain roaming in almost every tech area of our lives in the next 20 years.
But I gotta wonder, I mean, the whole point when blockchain was originally sort of created, established, and obviously that's tied to Bitcoin's history, but even just looking at the technology fundamentally itself, was the notion was revolutionary. The idea was not to just foment an upgrade or a next step, it was revolutionary at its core. Yeah. Is that compatible with Wall Street and Silicon Valley?
Yeah, so, well, that's a really interesting question. The founder of Celsius, Alex Mashinsky, he always says that internet will run on the blockchain. And I think, yes, I agree, the main use case is payments. But we still don't understand what blockchain will be, just like we didn't understand what internet was going to be. I think we're very early. And I think that this sort of NFT that Microsoft is giving away, it's a very cool use case to incentivize open source participation. And it does reduce the compliance costs of, okay, how are we going to give a payment to somebody that contributed to open source, or how do we increase open source participation? And it's really cool that now we're seeing a company like Microsoft giving, a try at these sort of like online baseball cards that are limited, and then you can, I think that's a cool use case.
And not to be a party pooper, but these huge companies, what about assuming that companies like Microsoft, IBM, Facebook, they're the people leading the blockchain sphere and its development in the future. Does that mean that smaller companies, startups who are trying to create a solution to something, or just a very basic utility and ecosystem for a particular thing, we have this all over this. Those are blockchain projects. It's the ICO phase that everybody's so angry about. What does that mean if these companies are leading? Will that no longer be the case? Will all of those smaller companies then fail?
No, I think the opposite. I think, blockchain, from a very abstract point of view, which is the one that I have because I am not a programmer, but from a very abstract, high-level point of view, it's a technology that allows for modular solutions. So unlike the solutions that we are accustomed to today, which is all, values absorbed at the top of the pyramid and it's centralized, blockchain sort of like hammers that pyramid and it all becomes a web. So I think that the entrance costs will be substantially reduced, and any small participant will be able to leverage the network effects of larger players such as Microsoft or IBM. So I think that
optimism sounds good to me.
Yeah, and if you're a small startup in this area, in Israel, in Europe, in the United States, or any other place in the world, I think it's a great opportunity for you, because you see giants like Microsoft getting busy with it, and it makes sense that in one point they'll say, hey, these startups have the skills, they have the knowledge, they have many very talented people who work in this area, so we might see Microsoft, getting and buying a startup like this, and we might see acquisitions and mergers in this area that will be, great news maybe for some startups.
If I may, I'd just like to give just an example to this. For example, an example of centralized companies today, it's like, for example, Facebook, right? Facebook, if you want to get users from Facebook, Facebook doesn't provide you any of the data, but blockchain, imagine that Microsoft gets a lot of users. You will be able to ask those users if you can get that data from them and potentially even pay back something to the user for their data. So it's going to completely change it. I think it's good.
I think that as blockchain is part of the tech world and as the positive notion of innovation, not like Senator Sherman was, as I see it, the entry to this industry will remain the same. I mean, we'll always have guys like Vitalik, who are innovative and on a borderline genius that can get into the industry and create impact. And I don't think that these guys, the giants, the corporates, will prevent that. If any, it's going to move the industry forward.
Certainly a good chance to move the industry forward, to move it into a new decade and to move into the future. And with that, I'm going to segue neatly or otherwise into the fact of the matter is, gentlemen, we are in December. We are at the end of 2019, the end of a year, the end of a decade. So we're going to do what you do at the end of such things, which is ask for your look back at what the significant theme, the most important or interesting development in the industry was in 2019. Now, to give you gentlemen a moment to think, Aran and I will start with our own interpretations thereof. So for me, it was the fact that if you cut out the months of April through about October, that we actually had a nice, steady, significant price rise in Bitcoin, starting from the year at about 3,200 and coming up now to, as of the time of filming, just above 7,000. I think if we get rid of that hype cycle that we saw in the middle of the year, arguably driven by Libra or China, the number of different narratives, we saw a recoupling of the value of the network and the price of the network, and I think that's a positive trend looking into the future of Bitcoin.
Asher, that was very, very concise and
Thank
specific. And mine's going to be a little bit less technical and the metrics. But I feel like in 2019, we really managed to cut out the bad apples from the ICO age that kind of didn't work. I feel like we figured out a lot of things within the space, and projects are working more specifically and towards a better goal. And although people still do focus on price, I feel like the narrative has kind of shifted to, okay, what are we doing to harness this? So I think that's the biggest takeaway from 2019.
Gil?
So as I saw 2019, of course we saw the rise in the hype in Bitcoin, but I think it's getting steadier as we go. But other than that, I see a stabilization process in the entire industry after what we had in 2017, 2018. I see that IEOs, which is a new mechanism, I don't think it was prior to maybe the end of 2018. As I see it, only people that offer real value right now are managing to raise funds. What we saw in 2017, 2018 is the ICO busts. I think we had like 70% of the ICOs were scam ICOs, around that figure. And what we saw this year is a maturity process of the entire industry, and I think that going forward we'll have a lot of more STOs. I know I'm a lawyer and lawyers are supposed to say that, but we'll have a lot more STOs going forward than 2020, maybe 2021. It's going to be a means to a new way of doing business, and I think we're going to see wonderful things from the industry in the coming years.
That sounds exciting. Leon?
I've only been seeing stablecoins since 2018. They said that was the year of stablecoins. I think 2019 was a real year of stablecoins, and going into 2020, it will also be about stablecoins for things like ICOs and even IEOs. People will not raise with their own coin. They will just raise via stablecoins instead of pumping up the price. I'm also really excited about STOs and how they will power through stablecoins. So yeah, that's what I'm looking forward to, and that's what I think this year was about.
Right.
Okay, so if I have to wrap up 2019, I'd say it was a great year if you're a lawyer. not so great if you're an entrepreneur.
2018 was better, way better.
Oh yeah? Okay, so you're the expert. So as we see, there were a lot of lawsuits across 2019. They started 2018 and maybe some of them even in 2017, but we see a lot of them last year. And that's, of course, a concern for investors, for entrepreneurs, for ICOs, for any kind of fundraising in this ecosystem. And I think we'll see them, these lawsuits, we'll still see them in 2020. I mean, they're not ended. We still see them this month. And in that terms, it's good news and bad news. Of course, it's bad news for the scammers, it's bad news for the criminals, it's good news for the industry, it's good news for if you're a genuine entrepreneur, if you're a serious businessman in this area, then of course you don't want to see scammers and criminals working with you. So I think in terms of laws, in terms of legal issues, in terms of regulations, 2019 is an important year. I'm not sure it's good or bad, but it's certainly important for cleansing this industry and, you know, cleaning it from scammers and criminals. But this process is still ongoing. We still see it in the next year. So don't be surprised if you'll still hear about, you know, lawsuits and arrests in the coming year. But for sure, in my eyes, it's good news. I mean, any high-tech industry, and blockchain, in my eyes, is a high-tech industry, should want to be in the highest standards, you know, legal standards, moral standards, and doesn't want to deal with criminals.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Essentially,
guys,
by the way, one point if I may.
Of course.
Regarding,
get it in there. This is the last time you get to give us your point.
Regarding the legal aspects, I think that as long as the statute of limitations apply, which for Israel example was 7 years, we'll still have exposure to legal proceedings for all scammers. So in the next couple of years, we'll still see some cleansing. As Roy said, I'm agreeing with him completely. We'll see lawsuits being filed on civil actions and maybe criminal action. And we'll still see all these proceedings taking place at least until 2025, I think.
Long institutional memories there that we'll all have to deal with.
Well, I'd like to thank you guys. I'll say your names individually here. So Roy Katsiri from Globes for joining us, Leon Markovitz from Celsius, and Gil Solomon, our resident attorney, to break things down for us. Cheers to all of you, and to you too, Asher.
Oh, thank you, and we'll raise a glass to everyone at home. Thank you so much for joining us at Blockchain on Booze, and stay with us at blocktv.com for all the latest in news, information, and of course the best of analysis. I'm Asher Westrop Evans. This is Aran Spitzer. Thanks for watching.
For more news and updates, follow us on Twitter.